Story is told of the Peanuts cartoon. I think her name was Peppermint Patty. Was talking to Charlie Brown one day and said, Charlie, this is apropos for this week. I believe that most kids are going to start school this week, right? Charlie, the first day of school, and I get sent to the principal's office, and it's all your fault, Charlie. Charlie looks at her and says, my fault? Why is it my fault? Her response is, you are my friend, aren't you? You should have been a better influence on me. Influence. What kind of influence are we being to those around us? I don't know why I got two stories to try to start this illustration off as today, but there was a pastor out working in his backyard, building a trellis for in his garden. Had his hammer and saw and his drill and things out there, and he was working diligently trying to build this trellis, and soon he noticed out of the corner of his eye that a neighbor boy was standing there watching him, observing him, not saying a word, just kind of watching, not getting too close, but close enough to be able to see and understand what's going on. And he just kept on working on his trellis, thinking he was doing a pretty good job at it. Also thinking that pretty soon the boy will get tired of watching him and stop making him feel uncomfortable that someone is standing over watching him do what he's doing. But the boy wouldn't leave. So then the pastor started thinking, well, maybe he's just observing how well I'm building this and trying to pick up some tips on building, for himself at his young age. And finally, he turned to the young boy and he said, are you trying to pick up some pointers to build your mom a trellis or something at some point in time? Immediately, the boy looked at him and said, no. I'm just standing here waiting to see what a pastor says when he hits his hammer, his thumb with his hammer. We're always being an influence someplace, right? We're either being a positive or a negative influence. What do people see around you is the question. What are they observing? What type of influence are you? And is it positive or negative? I believe that Jesus has energized us to be persuaders and influencers for him in all that we do. Before we jump into the meat of the text today, just recall that in the last several weeks that we were looking at the Beatitudes. And those Beatitudes come from Matthew chapter 5, and we got all through the Beatitudes. We aren't looking at those again, although there is one more Beatitude I believe is in the Bible, but we aren't going to look at it right now. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is beyond a doubt the greatest sermon that was ever preached on this earth. The Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' own words being spoken to the people. And I'm not saying we're going through the whole Sermon on the Mount. I'm not going to do that. But the next series of verses impact what kind of influence that we are and what kind of influence Jesus calls us to be. As we turn to Matthew chapter 5, we look at verses 13 through 16. Starts there, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Then it goes on in verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city that sits on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Common metaphors are used here in these two verses. Salt and light. Two images that no doubt the people of the day were very, very aware of and keen to in their life. Contemporary society, we miss the point really of what salt is. We think of it as just that blue container in our cupboards that we pull out and we use from time to time. But in ancient society, Bible time, salt was a very valued commodity. In fact, it was so valued that often soldiers were paid their wages with salt. It's kind of where we get the term from, not worth your salt. In that culture, light was also very important because they couldn't go to the wall and flip a light switch and have light in their home. They had to work on it. They had to go get the oil. They had to trim the lamps. They had to make sure good wicks were in there and start the fire in it. Our identity. Jesus is using these two symbols of the time, symbols for us today, to help us identify who and what we are in this world. Notice very carefully how Jesus says salt, talks about salt in verses 13 and 14. He doesn't say if you are, he says you are the salt. You get that? It doesn't sound like he's left very many options here for us, does it? He says, it doesn't say if you want to be, if you desire to be. He says, basically what he's saying here, you are my people. And because you are my people, you are now salt. And furthermore, in verse 14, you are now the light in this world. Options have now left us in our relationship with Jesus Christ. It is what we are called for. It is our mission. Once we are come to Jesus, once we've accepted him fully into our life, we automatically become his salt and his light to this earth. It means, the you here literally means the followers of Jesus. While it is our nature, while it may be like our calling to be influencers in this world, and that has a whole nother connotation today, doesn't it? What is an influencer? I haven't studied it very much, but I understand influencers are out there on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, somewhere out there on the internet someplace. And the scary part is, I understand they make thousands and thousands of dollars a month by being an influencer for whatever thing that it is they're influencing. But we are influencers of Jesus. And Jesus here is implying that believers, if you are not careful, you slip in your spiritual duty that you have been called to do. It's kind of weird to think for us today that salt can't be salty forever, or that a lamp is put under a bushel basket or whatever it is not of any good. It's not comprehensible to us in our thinkings today. But to Jesus and the believers, it was very easy for them to understand what it was. See, we have at least two roles that we can choose to take. One is negative, and the other is positive. Salt. Salt in itself and its purpose really exercise a negative function by delaying the decomposing of food of that time. And he warns the disciples not to be decayed by compromise in society. Light is a positive. We're supposed to be illuminating God's grace and his teachings to us and to everyone around us continuously. So it says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled by men underfoot. No doubt, if you've been in any Christian church, you've heard this message talked about more than once. Sometimes it's made to make us feel guilty. Guilty about not being a better or a more active witness in our lives. Salt, this salt in Scripture is so familiar to us, it's almost a common word, and we take it for granted. But then we hear that salt can lose its flavor. Salt can lose its purpose, its usability. The second part of the verse gives us insight in what it means to lose its saltiness. It literally means to make or to become useless in any way, shape, or form. To us, it may not make sense, but technically speaking, if salt is not salty, it's really not salt at all, right? Isn't that true? If salt is not salty, it's not salty at all. Well, we need to understand that our salt today is a purified salt. Back in the salt in their days, most of their salt was derived from marshes, lagoons, along the Dead Sea, from the rocks, wherever it was, and it contained many impurities. And over time, it would become useless. It become contaminated with these foreign substances, and it would be spoiled and it'd be thrown out. And that's why a lot of times you see pictures of over in that part of the world, the roads are white or whitish looking because they throw their useless salt out on their sidewalks. I wonder how about us? What contaminates our lives? How many times have we become saltlessness? We take our eyes off Christ. We wander in the way that we want to wander in this world. We do the things that we want to do. We live under our power, not under their power or his power. We soon forget that verse that Paul wrote in Romans chapter 6, halfway through, towards the end of the chapter somewhere in there, it says, you are all slaves, no matter, you just pick who you want to be slaves to. Are you going to be slaves to the devil or are you going to be slaves to God? And so I choose, I'm not going to be part of God's kingdom because he's got, it's way too many rules and regulations. And so I become contaminated with the sins of this world. I become useless. It seems almost unthinkable to us that this could happen. The phrase thrown out means just to get rid of, to dismiss completely of. So the question comes this: what do we do? How do we act as salt? What are we good for? Are we still salty at all? So how do we act as salt? The first thing we understand is salt gives taste. Right? I am not a cook. Me in a kitchen usually creates disasters. I found that very early in my married life. My wife worked in a medical office, and she would work on Saturday nights oftentimes. And so one Saturday night, I was home alone. I knew she was going to be home about 9 or 10 o'clock, and I thought, hey, I'll make her some brownies. A good treat. House will smell good. She'll have something to eat when she gets home. She'll love me even more. Couldn't eat the brownies. That didn't work so well. But this past week, I was going to help her again. Once in a while, I get brave and I venture out in the kitchen and try to help her get ready for supper because she works a long day, and we're going to have a simple supper. And so we're going to make some hash browns. I can fry the hash browns. So I get the butter out. I put it in the pan, put the hash browns in, fry them up, take them to the table, and take a bite. And oh, were they terrible. Guess what I forgot? Salt. So we get the salt shaker and we put it on. Now you cooks, is salt good when you put it on food? Is it better when you put it in the food while it's cooking? Yeah, because it infuses flavor, right? It puts it into the food. It's still useful in both ways, but it's much better if it's put in cooking of the food than it is after the food is cooked. As Christians, we are God's seasoning in this world that we live in. Just as salt adds zest, fires up the taste buds for the food we're about to eat, so too should we be making the Christian life more tasty and savory to those we come in contact with on a daily basis. And if I don't have that salt put in me on a daily basis, I'm not as flavorful or well seasoned as if I come to Daniel and I see him in a time of need and I just, okay, Lord, pour the salt on me. And I believe he infuses something with me and I try to put it on Daniel and it may be effective. It may make his life a little bit better for a second, but wouldn't it be a whole lot better if I have a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and what I had to share with him was more deeply seated in Jesus' teachings? True salt. Isn't it really easy to tell somebody if they are just saying it because they have book knowledge of it or life knowledge of it? Right? And Jesus wants to have us have that life knowledge of what it is. Some of us make Christianity boring, void of any joy. You know, I was told that Oliver at Window Homes reportedly said that he would have become a pastor in his life if certain ministers he knew didn't look and acted so much like undertakers. But think about it. Are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Go to church? Yeah, I go to church every week. It's so fun. Go there. Preacher gets up, preaches a boring sermon. Finally, get to go home and have lunch. Is that joyous? We make the Christian life sound like it's so boring, so hard, so tedious. Walk around like a bunch of undertakers. Or those that have been taken to the morgue and are just breathing by life support. The Christian life should be radiating from our lives and our faces every single day. Even in the most trying of times, there should be something different about our countenance and our character because we are Christians. Christ's life should be filled with joy even in the midst of struggles. Number 2, salt is a preservative. There are 2 substances mentioned in the Bible that are very small yet extremely influential: salt and yeast. They picture opposite forces, though, in the world today. Yeast is actually a mold that represents evil. Salt is a preservative that holds back decay, that brings flavor and seasoning into our very lives and those around us if we will allow it to. Remember, people back in that day, they didn't have refrigerators or freezers like we did, so they used salt to pack their meats in, preserve it from rotting. Used in this way, salt is something good. It keeps things from going bad. Are we a preservative for God in our culture today? I believe that God has put us in the right place at the right time to stop people's lives from rotting and decaying, and we are there to help preserve them for Jesus Christ. We have to have an antiseptic impact on our society we live in, and each one of you have an important part of society that you live in. That's the beauty of God's church, right? You don't work where I work. You don't play where I play. You don't go to school where someone else goes to school. We all have our circle of friends of influence. Think about it. 45, 50 people here. We have 45 or 50 circle of influences in our community this next week to use as positivity, salt of God, tasting good, savory, joy in our community. I couldn't get to all your places. If it relied upon the pastor to do it, I couldn't go to all your workplaces, to all your places of school, or all the places you play, or whatever you do, and be that salt. But God has given, you are the salt. Not the pastor's the salt, not the elders the salt, not the leaders of the church the salt. You are the salt. One pastor put it this way: we who follow Christ Jesus are to be moral disinfectant, stopping the spread of evil. We are to be the conscience of the community, speaking out for what is true and right. That's a huge responsibility, isn't it? That doesn't mean that we stand on the street corner and take our Bibles and pound them, say, you have to follow, you have to. No, it's not saying that. What it's saying is that you and I, we need to be willing and able to stand up right where we are and testify of the goodness and love of Jesus Christ. That's why we are called to live countercultural lives that are disinfecting this world for Christ. We are Christ followers, and we are to be the preserving influence to an inept, moral, spiritually spoiled world that we live in. But to do that, we must be connected to our community of friends. You understand what I'm saying? If it were possible, it would be 100% wrong for us to associate every single day, 24 hours a day, just with ourselves. It would be wrong. Christ calls us to be out in the world, to be that salty influence for him to the world. Now, get this. I wouldn't want to preach a sermon 7 days a week, but I would love to come together and study 7 days a week. It would be awesome. Someone shared with me today, the more I study, the more I learn that there's more to study. And I just can't get enough. I just want to study more. I want to study more. Yeah. So we come together and we do that. But if we don't take that study out to the world, what good is it? It is of no value in preserving the goodness and truth of Jesus Christ to our world. Understand? So, you are the salt to the world. You are God's personal face influence to whatever part of the world that you are a part of. And it's our responsibility to be that, because we are called. We are. All right, number 3. Salt creates thirst. We always heard the story, you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink, right? I can make a horse drink every single time if I give him salt first. He wants to drink. He needs to drink, right? Think about it. That's why, industry secret, not my industry, I don't like to eat at buffets. I prefer not to, for many reasons. But a lot of people don't realize that buffets feed overly salty food to you. to make you drink more, and then what? Eat less. Okay? The more you drink, the less you can eat, right? So they put a lot of salt in the food and make you drink a lot of water, that free fountain pop, and that fills you up so much. Oh, I'm so full so quick. I only went through line 5 times this time, not my normal 6 or 7. You see, when we're mixing it up with those who don't know Christ, God uses us to make people thirsty for Jesus Christ. When we're sharing the joy of being a Christian, we're sharing the joy of coming to church. We share the joy of coming to Wednesday night Bible study and studying together. He's using our words, our experience, our expressions as a way of drawing thirst to the people. Colossians 4:6 says, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that they may know how to answer everyone. Is every one of your conversations seasoned with salt? Will we treat people with gentleness, respect? They're more apt to listen to what we may have to say. Unfortunately, some Christians lose their saltiness at times, try to save this world with pepper spray. Salt is a seasoning. It is a preservative, and it makes people thirsty. And in these 3 cases, salt must be brought in contact with the very object that we're trying to save. It needs to be taken out of the salt shaker. I can't just study it, know it, and oh, it is good. God is so good. God is so good. And keep it to myself. I got to shake it around. I got to share it with others, or it will lose its saltiness. You see, here's the magical thing about it. If we desire to be God's salt of the world like He has called us to, our salt shaker will never go empty if we stay connected with Him. And it will always be useful salt. You will be surprised how many times in your life, if you will make this a practice every day to pick up His Word and begin to study it, you will be surprised how many times that very passage that you read that day is something that someone needed that day that you come in contact with. And you're ready to spill God's salt out upon them because you have filled the shaker. It happens over and over again in all of our lives if we would just be aware of it and understand what is there. We introduce people to a living, breathing, relative Jesus Christ. So we have an option. And this option, this choice, it is imperative for us to physically make. If we are seriously about obeying the commands of Christ, then we need to penetrate our lives with His gospel message. Salt must not be just sprinkled on meat to preserve it. It must be worked into the meat to preserve it. His word just can't be sprinkled upon us on Sabbath and think we have enough. His word needs to be worked and massaged into every avenue, every area of our lives to be ultimately preserving effect on our lives. Are you letting Him impact everything that you do in your life? Found this quote: a flight into the invisible is a denial of the call. A community of Jesus which seeks to hide itself has ceased to follow Him. In other words, if our little community here in Iowa City just seeks to keep it within these 4 walls of our church and just keep to ourselves, oh, we have something special, let's keep it to ourselves. Shh, don't tell anyone what's going on here on Sabbath morning. We don't want the wrong kind of people coming here to church. So don't tell anybody. Don't invite that person to church. They'll impact the way our church feels and looks and maybe smells or whatever it is. If we do that, we have ceased following Jesus in everything that we do. But when Christians get it right with God, when they begin to express Christianity through their lifestyle, to their neighbors, to their friends, to their workplaces, at their play, it cannot help but change and have an impact on people's lives. God will continue to bring revival and renewal in our lives and in humankind around us, our friends, our neighbors, in order to preserve a world until he comes again. So I want to close with a couple questions here today. What difference are you making and are you still salty? Or have you lost your flavor? Because Jesus says, you are the salt of the world.